Welcome back, folks, to episode 72 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills Project podcast with me, your host, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and an adjunct professor at a local community college. And what we're going to be discussing today has to do with placebo. Now, why do I want to cover this relative to self-regulatory skills? One is there is a component of belief that happens with placebo that often, even within self-regulation, we may run into as resistance of sorts whenever we try to change, improve, or enhance behavior, or even prevent things from going wrong in our lives. So the topic for today is going to be we follow our own placebos, or we tend to follow our own placebos. And this is something as an idea that helped me look a little more deeply into how we go about navigating our lives. And I was cued to this by reading Dr. Glenn J. Morris's book, Path Notes of an American Ninja Master, the late Dr. Glenn J. Morris. And he passed in 2006. But much of his ideas from the perspective of social psychology, among other things, really had a profound impact on the way I saw things having to do with, well, how do I interact in this world, and how can I more effectively relate to it in a way that allows it to be healthy for me and also allows me to grow without necessarily having to fall to the consequences of a really difficult upbringing or life or lifestyle necessarily, and allow us to keep our sense of center so we can improve ourselves or have some sense of trajectory that is moving in the direction of self-improvement. And self-regulatory skills actually help with that so we can stay more centered and keep things together, so to speak, for longer periods of time, so that way we run the risk of actually succeeding at getting out of maybe our personal ruts or behaviors or habits that causes pain and failure in those areas that we know that we could really succeed at. So let's start off with, well, what do I mean by a placebo? Well, first off, the definition of a placebo in an experiment, for instance, pharmacology uses these whenever they're testing drugs. Wherever a sugar pill is given, the sugar pill is the placebo. Then we have the control groups that are not given placebo. They're not given either medication to show what happens whenever an illness is not being treated at all versus being treated with a sugar pill, the placebo, versus the actual treatment, the medication in this case that they're testing. And these kind of experiments, they're generally very randomly assigned, so nobody knows who's getting what. But whenever we look at statistics, generally speaking, having to do with pharmacology and medication, placebo has an effect. It does have a salutary effect, not unlike the medicine. Sometimes the medicine wins out. Sometimes the placebo is not far behind, even whenever the medicine wins. But we have to take into consideration that there is a measure of faith that goes along with belief, that goes along with being treated for an illness, knowing that you're going to get medication, even if it's experimental, that is done with the intention of healing or improving a condition. So this is a front load that you can't really exclude from any kind of study, because ethically speaking, we have to let people know, informed consent, what it is that's going to be given, if it's given, and the possibility of their getting treatment or not. We have to let them know what they're going into. So informed consent is a big thing now. So what do I mean by placebo, following my own placebos? And that does not necessarily mean we pop a sugar pill every time we are doing things. That is how we do our lives, but really in the sense of belief, my placebo in quotes. What is it that I believe that I tend to hold on to? These sound like self-confirming biases. They sound like very personal biases and beliefs that often we find hard to let go of. Sometimes these beliefs are very closely tied to our upbringing, to our rearing, to our family members that we associate with having learned said principles, guidelines, and things of this nature to teach us how to get along with people and get along in the sense to get the things that we need in this lifetime. But sometimes morals and ethics, sometimes it can be very much a religious thing, and in some cases even spiritual. Some would say even superstition. And this is where we hinge upon the idea of traditions that are continued, and also whenever we have a loss of understanding of what a tradition was meant for in the first place, and whenever traditions actually do serve, could we really know why we're doing things? And maybe they're not traditions per se, and they're really just actual practical knowledge. Now, placebos fall somewhere in the nebulous realm that would be between all of those. And sometimes these are things that we learn on our own, that without explanation, maybe they still work, and we don't have to have the explanation, just like you don't have to have a full working knowledge of a combustion engine to drive a vehicle, a car. You don't have to know how it works for it to be driven, for you to drive it. You just have to know how to drive. So in this sense, what is my placebo, and what do I follow that keeps me, one, in order, two, healthy, maybe even safe or protected? And are my placebos, in this case our beliefs, serving me? Are they helping me? Now, often we don't pay attention to these things, and we don't do a whole lot of self-introspection about how I believe what I believe, or why I believe what I believe. And whenever we talk about following our own placebos, sometimes based on experience, what we see, we tend to assume without question whenever it works. And this is what we're talking about. So what is it that I need to do to be aware of what my belief is? Well, there are certain things that I may do that are driven by expectation and prediction, what my life has shown me. Do I expect certain things whenever, let's say I go to the store, and I know that certain people are going to be there helping with the baggage and bagging of groceries or items, and then there are other areas where I might have to do the self-checkout, and we kind of know what the expected deal is. Now, some of our behaviors, our expectations, have to do with what our experience is, and usually stores tend to maintain the same kind of format, but when they change, we're aware of it. Kind of like whenever the stores change modulars, and wherever you might find food in one aisle 1 week, and then 3 weeks to 4 weeks later, they're no longer there, but rather on the opposite side of the store. This is strategically done to encourage shopping for longer, because the longer you're in the store, chances are you're going to spend more money. And that is something that is intentionally done at the corporate level. But we become used to, we become expectant of certain patterns, certain ways, and places being a certain way. And there's a comfort in that. But there's also a measure of efficiency that we gain. We save time. But also, we also kind of know where things are going to be. And it takes the thinking out of the thinking, and we can do things with less stress, so to speak. That sense of being on the hunt, it lowers a little bit. So we are, yes, seeking food, maybe buying, and it's not a survival situation in the truest sense, but there is a measure of stress that goes with that when we know where things are, the stress goes down, and we become more able, more capable in a sense, and it's almost a small survival win, if you will. But there definitely is a certain belief and expectation that things are going to be a certain way. You're going to expect certain quality at certain stores, certain behaviors. And when we experience that over a period of time, we start developing a sense of belief. We assume a sense of belief that we'll call our placebo, so to speak, and we tend to keep that close, and we tend to let it take the driver's seat, so to speak, so that way we can be in a little more autopilot and expend less energy, since as humans we are energy hogs whenever we're doing something new and learning, but we tend to be very efficient and save energy whenever we become more skilled and also familiar with things. So we save energy for when it really starts to matter. Now, there are some components to this belief and the development of said placebo. And part of that is the visual information that we take whenever we recall and remember. Well, we remember things. Unless one is prosopagnosic, one has prosopagnosia, one is not consciously aware or very liminally aware of any visual capacity or capacity to create imagery in one's mind. Now, it's not zero. because unless someone is congenitally blind, you do have visual information, perceptive information. But whenever we recall it, certain people, the folks that have prosopagnosia, generally speaking, cannot consciously tell when it comes up, and they feel like they're stuck saying the words of what it is that they're trying to imagine. Fact of the matter is that it does fire the areas that have to do with visual recall, but it's so close to the subconscious level that it's hard for them to honestly say, yes, I did that and I imagined it and I can see it in my mind's eye. Some of the more important parts of how we develop a sense of belief is how we experience our world and what we expect of it. An important thing to note is that much of what we consider our known world is built on the words that we share and speak with each other. And an interesting quote that I saw in a book about development of language is, can you see what I'm telling you? Can you see in your mind's eye what I'm talking about? Do you see what I'm talking about? Do you see my point? We tend to leverage heavy in our linguistics the visual capacity whenever we're remembering or recalling, but also in the telling and the retelling of narrative. Whenever we started telling story, when we were cave people a long time ago, we started developing the tools of influence. And much of that has to do with beliefs and how compelling that belief is, how compelling the storyteller, and also how well ingrained that story stays with us. That determines whether or not we will guide ourselves' belief, so to speak, that stems from said narrative that we learned, the story about learning how to hunt, how to remember. And these things were actually relegated to the older folks in the tribe whenever they were no longer able to assist with the hunt, but still their knowledge and wisdom was useful, and that they could tell story and remind people about how things may have gone down. So we start developing a code of how it is that we interacted when we used to hunt and what we've seen, to help people remember what to be careful with. Oh yeah, over that hill is the saber-toothed tiger. So try to avoid the hill or go around another area instead of this area, just by virtue of narrating of past experience, and therefore developing a sense of belief and trust, because these people have been around a little while longer than the others. So this is a very important thing. There's a compelling nature to the language we speak, and the world that we live in is developed by the words that we use to describe them and to categorize those experiences in our life. And much of that is what our belief hinges upon, and therefore our beliefs that are working beliefs, our placebo, are the things that we're talking about. And sometimes we drive by those ideas, and they're enough to create change. Now, what about physical change whenever we're hurt or sick? Hypnosis is a very important point here, in the sense that we auto-hypnotize ourselves at times based on what it is we tend to believe, based on somebody's words and their authority, and whether or not we trust them. And those states of mind we're in and out of, and they're not like stage hypnotic depth where you can see somebody doing the hand levitation and clucking like a chicken. But we move in and out of those states where we are highly suggestible. And this is where we can actually see that belief placebo that we may learn to follow later, that guides us and protects us, so to speak, whenever we do things because it works. Whenever we are suggestible at a certain point in time, whenever we're inexperienced, whenever maybe we talk to an elder that has a narrative that teaches us, and then we use that as a guideline. Now, the world may not unfold and unravel and experience the way they may have told us or the way we heard, but sometimes it does. So if it does, then that narrative is not only useful, it's valuable, and we're more apt to repeat it, in the sense that we're more apt to follow what it is that it's teaching us. So we must keep that in mind. Next thing, the quality of the visual that occurs whenever we do have a mental recall, where we have a visual reference or experience of what it is we're talking about. There are 3 levels to the visualization that we pay attention to. Sports psychologists tend to use this, and sports psychologists that help people learn how to shoot better, basketball, shoot better with rifles and shotguns if they're doing skeet, or even aim better whenever they're doing archery, use these ideas. And it's even been used by Olympic athletes. Greg Louganis, one, always in his interviews would be asked how he trained. And the visualization was the woo-woo thing back in the late 80s, early 90s, but those that practiced this actually were very, very successful. They just didn't speak about it a whole lot. Of course, we didn't have a whole lot of brain scanning going on with the fMRI technology that we have now. But even then, that just points at the structures lighting up when we're doing certain things. So here are the three types of visualization that are important to pay attention to. There are others, but these are the ones that are most pertinent to our discussion right now, but also to better performance and self-regulatory skill over time being improved hinges on these three. One is the very first one, and this is something that, me being a martial artist, I've trained stick, knife fighting, empty hand, and whenever we're doing drills with partners, you have to respond within a certain time frame before something hits you. So one, you block, you evade, get out of the way, and then you do your counter or just get out of the way once again. But there has to be a perception of visually of the movement. You kind of have to see and decide what it is that's going on and determine what you have to do next. And if you do drills that are proscribed, you do them a certain way. Some would complain and say, well, they're not realistic. No one's going to fight you that way. That's not the point of the drill. The drill is to get you responsive to the stimulus and perceiving the stimulus early and responded to it in a fashion that is well structured, so it teaches you good form. So that way, whenever things do get dirty, you're going to react appropriately and not with sloppiness that could get you hurt or leave you open. So you train the good technique to the point where you become unconsciously competent over time. Now, the visual part is this, that you can train these drills and imagine what it looks like and what it feels like. Close your eyes before you do it. It doesn't have to be particularly meditative. If you see or even remember a lemon being bitten and you salivate, not so differently whenever we see somebody trying to touch us and we see us reaching up with, let's say, our right hand and slapping it out of the way. Someone trying to touch us with a stick, not hit, but touch. And then we get out of the way, duck our shoulder, or evade. And we can see ourselves in our own mind, like we're doing the Super Mario Kart, seeing through our own eyes and seeing our own hands. This is first person. And whenever we do that, and you're sitting still but not actually doing the motion, you may actually feel some of the motor neurons firing your muscles to wherever you might even get twitching muscles. Your spine may start moving, or your body starts moving in very small-ish ways where the muscles are flexing. And not hard, these are very subtle, but I know that I get twitches once in a while when I see things. A friend of mine and I, many years ago, discussed the movie Hunted whenever we saw the knife fighting scene, and it was so vivid that whenever you saw it, it was like a first person where the knife was coming in the direction of where the camera was recording. And I remember twitching, and my friend told me, yeah, I was twitching and my body was moving out of the way because we're so associated in, because those perspectives that they were showing where the knife was coming at you was like a training drill where you were first person and experiencing that. And the speed and sound and all that was very immersive. So the very first type of visualization is first person, wherever you're in it. And you don't have to be physically moving, but sometimes your body will twitch when you associate it, especially if it's a familiar movement, especially if it's a familiar thing. And you can even see a scenario where somebody's walking up and sitting down across from you at a desk, and where they may see or say something, and you can rehearse what it is that you're going to do. This can be problematic in that sometimes we might ruminate on a situation, and then the person whom we may have beef with, for instance, and we're seeing ourselves telling them off, they tend to be kind of dumb in our minds. We don't give them the full benefit of what they've shown before, but that's okay, because it's really about developing the skill on our end and be able to deliver it. And then sometimes we figure it out with practice when we get there, but it does have carryover. Now, the next thing is the second person perspective, wherever it's like you're seeing yourself applying them to somebody in the walking a mile in their moccasins or being in their shoes. This is a little more difficult when you're doing physical skills, seeing yourself applying them and being the recipient of what it is you're trying to apply, but it can be done. But I use this a little less when I'm teaching physical skills, but it's definitely a way to get an idea as to what it looks like if you're looking for mistakes and need to correct actions, if you were to see them from the second person or the mirror perspective. The more important one is the third, and that's a third person, wherever you see yourself actually from the outside doing it, even at a distance. It doesn't have to be a long distance wherever you're seeing yourself, kind of like the ABC cameras whenever they were seeing Greg Louganis dive, and they had the film, not the film, but the camera set at the side of the pool, and you could see the tower he was diving from, and then you'd see him setting up way up high. And being able to see that, even if it doesn't look perfectly like you, but you see the action at a distance the way you need to see it, in probably the most picturesque, perfect way, then you're doing great with the visualization. Now, there's one internal one. We're going back to the first type of visualization. It's me, wherever I'm doing the action. And some people have described it as like doing the movements as if you had kind of like a bike helmet with a camera, and you're seeing it in that perspective. And that's still just another way of saying first person from your own eyes, seeing your own hands perspective. And you can see it as driving. You can do this wherever you're walking. But whenever you imagine this, even if you see yourself moving a little slower, because you really have to pay attention to the details when you're remembering how you do this, that's okay. But you also start developing some skills within the sense of time distortion. And this is kind of a hypnotic effect. Some people really overly mystify it. The fact of the matter is, whenever we do that, we can actually see ourselves very meticulously doing things detail for detail, slower than we could otherwise physically. And when you do that, you're actually disciplining your mind to pay attention to pertinent details and not get hung up. And sometimes, even whenever you do the visualization, you may get hung up on the detail till you fix the hang up, and then you keep moving smoothly through there. Sometimes you could do it at a high speed. You could do it at regular speed, and you play with your mind in that sense. You can actually adjust how you perceive the speed of the exercise and how you relate to it, and how you can actually see yourself do it slowly, then rewind it, do it slow, and do it again a little faster till you're at top speed. And then if you really want to play with it, get it to the point where it becomes a blur, literally superhuman speed beyond what your normal speed is, and you'll realize that your body starts responding in a way. I've done this before, and you do tend to move faster because there's some things that happen. This is mental practice of physical things that once you get to the point of red line, wherever you are now unconsciously competent, and you do it enough, you no longer have to think, and your body just kind of happens to be there moving before you actually start seeing too much of the motion. You start responding at the root of their motion if it's a physical skill you're learning. But when it comes to self-regulatory skill, whenever you see things, you may start reading body language a little more quickly. If you're already sensitive to it, you can see how the things come up, and you can start to plan. You can avoid situations, and you can change what direction you're going when you realize you have more control and more choice in the matter that otherwise it would feel if you weren't paying attention to such things. So what is the placebo that I follow? Well, that's the belief. How do I believe things to be? Often the placebos we follow are the beliefs and guidelines, sometimes the ethics and morals we may have learned. And it doesn't mean that they're not true, but all things are truisms until they reach the point where they're not anymore. And whenever things work until they don't, that sounds so abrupt and rude. But usually if you realize that things work within certain paradigms and they stop working in others, then you realize that maybe that truism is rather effective. And that is also a breaker of said placebo sometimes. And maybe it's one that develops a new one. Well, things work until they don't, I guess. So for now, I just want to say thank you. I just want to share this with you, and I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Glenn Morris, the late Dr. Glenn Morris, and those that have read his book. And I am one who has read it many times and gotten much out of it, but this is one thing that actually applies in my everyday life. I'm ever grateful for that. And I'd like to invite you to seek out my podcast. Share my podcast. Give it to people. Let people know about it. I have a presence on YouTube under the name Armando Dominguez, but also Running Man. You can find a few videos there. In addition to all of the podcasts, audio podcasts, I'm on iTunes as well as Spotify and all other platforms where you find your podcasts, in addition to X as well. And we're continuing to grow our presence along social media gradually because I am a one-man show right now. But I certainly look forward to talking to you again. I appreciate your time. Thank you for your listening. But my question to you before I close is, what are my placebos and what placebos do I follow? And I hope you have a really good day. Take care. Walk well.